All right, so the acoustic sound a little bit different. It's because I'm in Florida and we're at an Airbnb, and we're able to run down the great Montel Williams, who's not close but not far enough that he couldn't make it here in an Uber. Good to see you, Montel.
Good to see you too, sir.
I've always been a fan.
Thank you.
I always enjoyed your work, and so when we figured out that you were somewhere in the neighborhood, we thought, why not sit down with you in the Airbnb and get to the bottom of Montel.
Come on now.
All right. So obviously people know the show, which ran for, God, almost 20 years, 18, 17 years, 17 years, syndicated back when that stuff kind of ruled the roost, or the syndicated daytime shows.
Crazy. And back at a time when, real kind of talk and reality TV started. That's when the blend kind of came together, if you kind of think back on it. Because, going back, a lot of people don't remember, my show started in May of 1991 rather than September when most other shows began.
Mm-hmm.
New seasons began. So, back when I started, my show started, there were only 4 other talk shows. Sally, Geraldo, Donahue, and Oprah. Yeah.
Oh, her.
And, or her.
What happened to her?
Yeah. And,
she's probably ballooned up and is living in exile somewhere.
I think she made a killing off of that weight loss thing, man. Right? Weight Watchers made a killing, and she's been doing really well. But the show started then, but I'll take you down a little trip down memory lane. It was after my show began, September of 1991, Ronald Reagan Jr. had a show.
Oh, right.
John Tesh had a show with Lisa Gibbons.
Yeah.
Chuck Woolery had a show.
Yeah.
Jane Pratt had a talk show, none of which actually lasted any longer.
Well, so listen, if you want to go ahead a little bit further than 91, but get into the mid-90s, into the sort of 96, 97, I used to do everyone's show. So I would do Terry Bradshaw's show, Home Team. Donnie and Marie.
Yes.
They dusted those two off and brought them back. And shows I couldn't.
Gabrielle Carteres. They were
everybody but me. Everybody had a show.
You should have one.
But me. Well, they needed someone to be the guest.
There you go.
Because everybody had their own show. So I was just the guest that would just go to all these shows. And, oh, God, there was the one Quincy Jones produced with Chris, I can't remember who.
If you go walk down that memory lane, when my show started and when it went off the air, 137 other hosts came and went.
Really?
Yeah, it was kind of crazy back then. And there were seasons when there were 16 of us on the air at the same time. And then by the end of that season, it would drop back down to 4 and it would go back up to 10.
So for you, I know you have a military background, which is pretty extensive. I would assume I don't have a military background. I have a sort of intense football sports background, and I just sort of fall back on the discipline of it all the time. Mm-hmm. And things don't feel difficult because I kind of knew what difficult was, like when you're in the military or when you're doing hardcore 2-a-days and it's 105 degrees outside and some guy's screaming at you. Mm-hmm. If you throw up, you're doing another lap. So I'm guessing that served you well. 20-something years?
It served me very well. My career spanned 22 years. And I say span because I had a couple of little breaks in there. I had a break in there after 18 and a half years, and I went in the reserves, and I finished out. My show started, and I was partially in the reserves when I first started, but then I went ahead and resigned after that. But, served me well. Literally, I think really defines me, even to today.
And I know your dad had an interesting story about being in the fire department, then being the first black fire chief of Baltimore.
First African-American fire chief of a major city in America.
Of a major city in America.
It was Baltimore.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah.
But very interesting, with him, my dad, I didn't find out until I was in my mid-40s that he was Jamaican. And I don't know if you know anything about good Jamaican jokes, is that, how many jobs you got? How many jobs you got?
Right.
So my dad was one of those guys who had, I'm telling you, he was a carpenter. He sang in a band. He was a bus driver. He worked in the fire department all at the same time.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, but over his entire life, 18 years, he went to night school to get his degree. So he finally got a degree, a bachelor's, I think, in like city administration or something like that. And he went on to become, this is the significance about him being the first African-American fire chief, is that fire chiefs routinely around America were never black. And for him, he had ascended to the pinnacle of, deputy chiefs in Baltimore, but was never promoted to chief. He finished every single year for 7 years in a row. He was number one in the chief's exam, but they would not give him the chief's job. So he ended up being asked by a couple of different mayors. One made him the commissioner of transportation. The next one made him the commissioner of public works, because he had ascended so high in city politics. They wanted to keep him around, but they just didn't want to give him that job. And then finally it was Mayor O'Malley who literally promoted him to fire chief.
What year was that?
Oh, that was right after my show started, so it was 1992.
Okay. Yeah, what I learned as a former carpenter with working with guys that are trying to get in the fire department and knowing something about that, which is a lot of guys who are carpenters or who are firemen became carpenters because of the schedule, because it's a physical thing. They're up to it, number one. Number two, they're, 3 days on and 4 or 5 days off, and they could have another job. And then they understood how structures were constructed.
Yep.
Because you got to know, when you frame a house, you got to put fire blocks in the wall.
Right, and when you go in as a fireman, you got to know which wall you can rip down, and the ceiling will come down.
What's load bearing, what's non-load bearing, and stuff like that. So there's a general cross-pollination between fire guys and carpenters, and so a lot of firemen become carpenters on the side.
Absolutely right. I mean, he literally he was a fireman for about a carpenter about 5 years, and he was like a jack of all trades. Because back then, you could go to all the individual schools to learn how to do masonry, learn how to do this. He just kind of learned it all. And over the course of about a 4-year period of time, after building multiple houses, he would always go collect all of the refuse from the Dipsy dumpsters, and he would pile them in the back of a friend's yard enough that he was able to build a house for us. It's kind of crazy.
The sloppy seconds residence.
Sloppy seconds residence, but it's still held up. It's holding up today.
And how was his take on you getting out of the military versus syndicated daytime television? That's quite a departure. Dad could have been proud, or Dad could have thought you were a sauce, as we used to say.
I'll tell you, I had an uncle who was a Supreme Court Justice, state of Maryland, George Russell Jr., first African American Supreme Court Justice for the state of Maryland. He called my father. He and my father were on the phone at the same time when I called my dad to tell him, because they were hanging out somewhere, and I called my dad to say, this is really weird, but man, I think I just got a television show. He said, what? I said, yeah, I just got the call today. I got this show. He said, what are you going to do? Because at the time, I had already gotten out of the military. I was running a nonprofit organization. I was speaking around the country. I was making a little bit of money. And he was like, well, you're not going to walk away from what you're doing to do the show. And I said, well, it's a fairly decent paycheck. I mean, first thing, I got a 13-week pickup. Now, my show actually literally created this whole thing called a slow rollout, because Viacom basically picked me up for 13 weeks and didn't know what they were going to do with the show after that. And then the show kind of started catching traction, so therefore I stayed on. So he said, you're going to walk away from what you're doing and you built to do a 13-week job? Are you crazy? And I was like, I don't know. I think it's going to work. He's like, well, I got you back, but I wouldn't walk away. So my dad was initially against it, but then he ended up jumping aboard and saying, yeah, I think you got something going here.
Yeah, at the beginning, I had a little bit of that in my own career, which is you just don't know if you're getting a second season. And for me, I wanted to buy a house. And everyone in my family said, what if you buy the house and then you don't get picked up?
Right.
And then you're back to carpenter.
Yep.
How you're going to make those payments. And there is that in television and in many industries, I suppose. But I think at the end of the day, you bet on yourself.
You have to.
Because there's not a wheel that has your name on it and Terry Bradshaw's and Donnie Marie's name on it. It is, you get to kind of control the wheel.
Absolutely.
And people do this thing all the time. I sort of say to people all the time, they go, professional sports, you wouldn't advise your kid or make your 13-year-old try to think they were going to go to the NBA. And it's like, well, if your kid was LeBron James, you would.
Most definitely, or Michael Jordan.
Or you definitely. Well, Michael not at 13, maybe. Right. But the point is if those guys were leaving high school, their counselor should be telling them about the NBA.
No,
my counselor would be a fool to tell me about the NBA.
So would mine.
Right, it'd be a dereliction of duty for him to tell me about it.
A funny story would be, look at David Robinson. I don't know if you knew anything about David Robinson.
Naval
Academy graduate, just like myself. But David entered the Naval Academy, I think he was 6'3", 6'4". Mm-hmm. He graduated from the Naval Academy 6'11" and a half, almost 7 foot tall.
Wow.
So, his first year at the academy, he was okay on the basketball team. His second, third, fourth year, he started crushing it nationwide and literally grew 7 inches while he was at the academy. So I think about that high school coach was going, nah, dude, I don't think the NBA is for you. And then blinking one morning and going, holy moly, I trained that guy.
What was the Naval Academy like for you?
Absolutely insane. I'll tell you why. Because I grew up in a little area, maybe 20 minutes from Annapolis, Maryland. It was a little area called Glen Burnie, Maryland, just south of Baltimore. And to be honest with you, as a kid, when I was in my sophomore, junior year, we used to go down to Annapolis and try to catch those guys in those stupid white uniforms and see if we could make them dirty before they went back. I mean, we wouldn't jump and hurt anybody, but, you might throw something at one of them, or you might, call them out and cause a little ruckus. But it was not a place that I had in mind. Now, what ended up happening was I graduated from high school, entered the Marine Corps. I went to Marine Corps boot camp. So I went to Marine Corps boot camp in Parris Island, South Carolina.
Oh, wow.
And got out of boot camp. I was meritoriously promoted in boot camp to the rank of PFC. I left as one of the honor guys, graduating with my platoon. And I was supposed to go to 29 Palms, California to attend communication electronics school. But by the time I got out there, the classes were so backed up that they couldn't put me in a class, and so they made me what's called a troop handler, which is just an administrative person in one of the offices that bring the new accessions in and get them rolled up in school. So they placed me there. I happened to succeed and excel fairly well, so I got meritoriously promoted again. And I had this gunnery sergeant say to me, dude, why are you here? I can look back at your high school record and see that, I was the president of my class, I did a whole bunch of different things, and he's like, you should be an officer. I mean, you graduated really high in your class and you did really well. You should be an officer. There's this place called Annapolis that you could go to the academy and be commissioned. I went, Annapolis? That was right down the street from where I lived. Okay, right. That sounds okay, cool. So because I had been out of high school for that point in time a year, I had to go to the prep school first. I went to the Naval Academy Prep School in Newport, Rhode Island. Once graduated from there, I was I got my appointment to the academy. And I will tell you, when I walked in there, first off, I'm 18, 19 years old now. When I walked in the academy, I was 20. So I was a little older than my classmates. I was 19 and a half. And I was a boxer. I boxed in the Marine Corps, so I used to do a lot of boxing smokers. So when I got to the academy, I started boxing immediately. I won the Plebe Summer Brigade Boxing Championship.
What weight division?
Believe it or not, I was a welterweight, man.
Is that like 147?
147. I graduated. Look, I'm 6 foot tall. I was 6 foot tall, so I was 13 years old, but I didn't break 160 pounds until I walked in the academy. So I boxed as a welterweight, but one of the things that was kind of cool back then in '76 when I entered the academy is that you could literally call anybody out that you wanted to call out. Meaning, like, if you were an upperclassman and you were giving me a hard time, I could say, dude, meet me in the boxing ring this afternoon. You know what I mean? You think you're that bad? Meet me in the boxing ring, even as a plebe. And so I did that with a couple of second class, and I did that with one third class, a guy who was 1 year ahead of me. And, I was pretty good. When I boxed in the Marine Corps, I did 20 smokers. I was 19, 1-1. Wow. Had 18 knockouts.
Wow.
So I was pretty good. Why?
Because
I'm 6 foot tall. All the guys I'm boxing against are 147 pounders. These guys are 5'4" and a half,
You're
5'5".
like the Tommy
So
Hearns
Tommy Hearns at the
of
time.
the Marine
That's right.
Corps.
I had a really
good reach.
Pretty good reach and pretty good
leverage.
Jab. Good
Yeah.
leverage. So, after calling a couple guys out and bloodying a couple noses, a lot of the upperclassmen just kind of whatever. Leave them alone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't want to say I cruised through, but my experience was a little bit different. And then because I was a little older than classmates, I had, kind of a way to maneuver myself so that it was easy, but it wasn't easy academically. I will tell you that. The Academy at the time was probably one of, the top 5 colleges in the United States. Naval Academy was. We averaged 22 hours every semester from freshman year through graduation.
22 hours.
22 hours every semester. So we would do 16 hours of hardcore direct pre-engineering courses, and then you had about 5.5 hours of some sort of military-related courses.
Yeah, there's 2 things I like. I like that the military pulls people out and says, what are you doing here? You'd be better suited there, which is part of their job, and it behooves them.
Yep.
So it's a system that works because it doesn't work for them to have Montel shuffling papers at 29 Palms. They better use of you to get you into the academy and see what you can do.
Absolutely.
So I like those kinds of systems because it keeps everybody on the up and up. They're not doing you a favor, they're doing them a favor, but they're doing you a favor while they're doing them a favor.
How about we think about the fact that if that has that kind of effect on an individual, why do we frown upon the idea of national service for everyone? I don't understand why we don't as a nation. And I'm not necessarily saying that everybody's got to go in to be a Marine or Special Forces, but why can't we have, there was a really good idea presented, I'm telling you, 20 years ago, you may not remember the name, but Donald A. McDonald, when he was the Secretary of Education back under Ronald Reagan for a year or 2, he was working with then George Bush's brother.
Jeb? Wait.
No, the other one. The other one, and I can't remember his name right now. But they had come up with an idea for something called America's Youth Corps. And America's Youth Corps was going to be a way for high school graduates to, for 2 years after they graduate from high school, enter national service. Now, you might be, a guy who's going to be out on the firefighting lines for wildfires. You could have been a person who might have been out there cleaning roads. You could have been out there a person who's just doing some form of national service to recognize the fact that freedom's not free.
No, listen, we're at a point in history where this is coming up a lot in my head. I referenced it a few weeks ago on the show, but I remember interviewing the late, great Coolio back on Loveline in like 97, and he told me he got into some trouble and he got into the firefighters corps, and they basically took the troubled teens who kept getting in and out of juvie or whatever, and they handed them a orange vest and a shovel, and they straightened them out.
Sure.
And we have this aversion to you can't make kids do this. First off, you're hurting these kids by not giving them structure.
That's my point of view.
And it's sort of, it dovetails to me a little bit with shop classes.
Yes.
I remember years ago, they would do a lot of like Sheryl Crow wants to save the music and we need music class. And I'd go, we need shop classes because no one's playing the viola for a living, but these kids need to learn how to turn a wrench or do HVAC work or plumbing work or whatever. I left high school. I wandered onto a construction site and I dug ditches for a year, and so did all my goofball friends who had no training. We should have been apprentice electricians by the time we'd left high school, or pipe fitters or anything. We talk nothing about it. We talk like everyone is going to college.
Yes.
Some people go to college, the rest don't. And for the rest, we have no plan other than go home, get a job at Burger King, and play video games.
Ridiculous. I bet you, with the new AI technology that's out there right now, I bet somebody could scan every podcast, every radio show in the last 20, Adam, I'm telling you, last 20 years, and I will bet you nobody's ever referenced shop class. I don't think the word shop class has come up.
No,
and
only when Mike Rowe comes on my show, and then it becomes a shop class orgy. But yes, shop class.
Do you remember, now see, again, I'm a little older than you, but I graduated from high school in 1974. In my high school in 1974, they had a wing, 3 classrooms that were set up like a nurse's station, so that they taught nursing courses in school. We had a shop. We had an entire building. One of the funniest things I'll never forget, when I was in school, with the shop teacher, literally a whole bunch of guys got together. He had one of those little Carmen Ghia. Remember that little Volkswagen Carmen Ghia?
Yeah, sure.
Well, a lot of guys got together. We took his Carmen Ghia and put it on the roof of the shop buildings.
Wow.
Which was it was crazy. One of those high school senior pranks, right?
Sure.
But, I mean, I took shop every single year, 9th, 10th, 11th grade, 12th grade. And of course, I had a dad who, took advantage of having a couple sons there to help do all the extra work in the house.
Yeah.
So I knew a little bit about welding. I knew a little bit about soldering. I knew a little bit about the hammering, painting. I knew that, but I also took advantage of it in school. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I don't understand why you hit it on the head. We went to this society that believes culturally that everybody has to go to college, whether you want to or not. And
or whether you're cut out for it or not. Well, I am not cut out for college. Right. It's fine. It's not my sport. You know,
there you go.
I do things. I'm good at things. That's not one of them. And getting me to go to college is sort of like, we got to teach this fish to ride a bicycle. You know what I mean? It's just like, why? It's not what they're meant for.
And look at what's going on right now around the country when it comes to electricians, comes to apprentice plumbers. They're paying in New York City, I think right now it's like almost $80 an hour for an apprentice. To come in and help you. I got to change 2 light bulbs. Excuse me. Come on now.
I was talking about it on the podcast the other day. I talked to a friend of mine, Bodie Stroud. He builds hot rods for a living. He needs fabricators and welders and guys that turn wrenches and stuff. He said, my business is done. I said, why? Why is it? I can't find anybody.
Right.
There's nobody who will do this work. And everyone else goes to college. They become a Chicano studies major. They rack up $200,000 in debt. They get out. Maybe they get a job working at a library for $41,000 a year if everything works out. Meanwhile, 2 years out of high school, if you were an apprentice plumber, electrician. I mean, I had a guy come to my place in Malibu who was going to hook up a water filtration tank. I said, what's the charge? And he said it was like $3,600. I said to him, because I used to do it for a living, I always like this game. I go, so what do you got in parts? And I know it's a bunch of elbows and fittings and a little flux and a acetylene torch tank or something. He rounds up. He goes, I got like $400 in parts. I go, okay, so now that leaves us $3,200 or $3,000. I go, how many guys are going to work on this? He goes, just me. I go, how long is it going to take you? He goes, half a day. I'm like, oh, so you make $1,300 an hour? Like, literally, that's what he's saying. Now, those are Malibu rates.
Gotcha.
Don't get me wrong.
They're not that far off anywhere else.
This guy ain't making $80 an hour. He's making what Mark Garagos makes on a billable hour.
Yes.
To one of his highfalutin, clients. So there's money to be made, and what we shouldn't. And so what it is, it's a snobbery. It's academics. First off, who's at the high schools? Academics. You don't have a bunch of dudes like your dad or you or me wandering around. You have people who chose that path and that system. And they're trying to push everyone into some sort of college mold. And it's a kind of a snobbery. What really, and it's almost, it's like almost like if you said, well, my son's a plumber, you'd hang your head a little and go, sorry about that. Absolutely
right now,
not.
I'd be looking up at the sky. My son's a plumber. Yeah, he's making $1,400 an hour. Sorry.
Right. Be realistic. Be realistic. That's all right.
Right.
And your job isn't to shove everyone in your high school into college. Your job is to find out where everyone's best suited so they can go out and be fruitful, make a living, be independent, pay taxes, and become a member of society.
Square pegs, round holes. Stop the stupid. Let's start letting the round go where the round are. Let the squares go where the squares are. And let's not, you're right, so much snobbery behind this. It really just is ridiculous that we can try to denigrate those who help to make our society as whole as it is. You look at all the trades. It doesn't matter what they are: plumbing, electricians, ditch diggers. I don't care what you want to call them. Ditches still need to be dug.
Yeah.
Plumbing still needs to be done.
Yes.
Or instead we go ahead and start to watch this ridiculous, I think, just the extreme rise in the prices of just, the average home these days. And it's because, again, we're limiting the number of people who can do it, so therefore they can hit you with the price tag that they want to hit you with, and prices are going to keep going up and up and up and up. One day we'll wake up.
I agree, and I also realize that there's something that is connected between sitting indoors and air conditioning and pushing paper around and mental instability. There is something to being outdoors, being on your feet, having something in your hand, tools, wood, putting things together. At the end of the day, you got to step back and see what you did.
Absolutely.
You got a visual confirmation that you're alive and that you accomplished something. And, it's anecdotal, but all the dudes I worked with over the years in those fields, construction, trades, automotive stuff, never talked to me about depression or allergies or food-borne allergies. None of them were ever gluten intolerant or anything. They were just dudes who showed up.
Yep.
They were always in the same mood. They were never moody. They never took me days. They were rarely ever sick because magically they needed to get paid. And
how about the sense of accomplishment?
Yes.
How about the sense of, unfortunately, and I'm not one of these doomsday people, and I'm not one of these people but look, let's just talk about the fact. We spend 70, 80 years on this planet. You come, you're born, you work your ass off, you're gone. 2 years later, most people don't remember. Here's a question for you. I ask this to a lot of people, but it's like, if I were to ask you, and you, Adam, you would be able to answer this question, but the normal person can't. Name 100 influential people who lived in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And I'll guarantee you that most people will stop at 10.
Oh,
they make it to 11, but most people will stop 10 or 11.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to say that we're so insignificant,
No.
but let's tell you the truth.
At like
we're not as significant as some of us think we are.
When I got to 9, I'd be like, did I say Pia Zadora
Right.
already? Or if I didn't, then I'm adding her.
That's another one, AI. Who has said Pia Zadora's name in the last 15 years? But okay. Do you, those who are listening, do you know who Pia Zadora is?
No.
Aha.
Well, look her up.
Look her up. It'll shock you. And especially in an age of Me Too.
Oh, yeah.
Come on.
All right. Montel's hanging. We'll take a quick break. Be right back with him right after this. Homes.com knows that when it comes to home shopping, it's never just about the house or condo. It's about the home. And what makes a home is more than just a house or property. It's the location. It's the neighborhood. If you have kids, it's also schools, nearby parks, transportation options, all the above. That's why Homes.com goes above and beyond to bring home shoppers the in-depth information they need to find the right home. And when I say in-depth, I'm talking about deep. That's right. Each listing features comprehensive information about the neighborhood, complete with a video guide. They also have details about local schools with test scores, state rankings, and student-to-teacher ratio. They even have an agent directory with the sales history of each agent. So when it comes to finding a home, not just a house, this is everything you need to know, all in one place. Homes.com. Homes.com. We've done your homework. Let me tell you about Z-Biotics. Oh, man, this is a game-changing product. I use it before a night out with drinks. It's called Z-Biotics, a alcohol probiotic drink invented by PhD scientists for rough mornings after drinking. When you drink alcohol, well, the alcohol turns into a toxic byproduct in your gut, and that's to blame for the rough next day. Not dehydration, as everyone thinks. ZBiotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Let's face it, after a night with drinks, I don't bounce back the next day the way I used to, back in the day. So I drink ZBiotic before my first drink, and, I like a martini, but the first drink's a ZBiotic, that's for sure. And you wouldn't believe how on the top of my game I felt the next morning. So I did this. Man, when I had a Super Bowl party, I was like, oh boy, we're going to start early. So I'm getting into my ZBiotic early, and it makes all the difference. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Right, Dawson?
Vacations, weddings, birthdays, and reunions. Oh my, there's so much going on. Get the most out of your spring plans by stocking up on pre-alcohol now. Go to zbiotics.com/Carolla to get 15% off your first order when you use Carolla at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money. No questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/Carolla and use the code Carolla at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, ZBiotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times.
All right, Montel Williams having a great conversation here in Florida. Let's be blunt with Montel. That's the name of the podcast, and the show, Military Makeover with Montel as well. That airs on Lifetime. So Military Makeover seems right up your alley because of the building experience in the background and the military background. It's a perfect peanut butter cup for you.
Absolutely. Well, you started with Let's Be Blunt. I also do one that's called Free Thinking with Montel. So Let's Be Blunt drops every Thursday, new episode. And I if I can say this, I have to because I got to pat myself just a little bit in the back. We just proudly now hold the position as the #1 cannabis podcast to listen to in 2024. We were given that little moniker and by FeedSpot, a brand monitoring service, but they picked us as the #1 cannabis-centric podcast.
Well, there's a lot of them out there, so good on you. And when I started podcasting 15 years ago, we didn't need categories. There were 8 podcasts total. And that was about it.
And now you are the pinnacle. But I mean, I was kind of happy with the fact that we've caught on. It's a podcast that is cannabis-centric, in the sense that we talk about both cannabis and hemp, but we kind of, we have some really great guests on. We have Jim Belushi's been on. We've had,
love Jim.
Dr. Oz, Sanjay Gupta. We've had lots of luminaries in the cannabis industry, but lots of families who will talk about their journey through cannabis. And this is, we hit on a lot of the legal aspects, and we talk internationally and nationally.
And how has cannabis affected you in MS?
Oh, are you kidding me? I will tell you that, it has been in my quiver as one of my frontline used weapons against my illness. Very early on, I'll tell you what happened. When I first got diagnosed with MS, my symptoms were such that I had extreme, and I still suffer from it today, I have extreme neuropathic pain. My feet, my shins, a little bit of my side, a little bit of my face. Though my face, which is called trigeminal neuralgia, has gone away. But, the front line of defense that doctors had back then when I was first diagnosed was put me on opioids. And so OxyContin wasn't, one of the frontline drugs back then. They had drugs that are called like Tauin. And I'm not putting down any pharmaceuticals.
Back then it's 1999?
99 I got diagnosed. I was starting my medication journey early 2000. And from about 2000 to about 2001, I literally took that journey down the path of, I'm not going to throw out the names of them, but opioids there were periods of time I was taking 11, 12 a day. And I was chasing that ghost that was never going to be caught. And that ghost is the fact that we know scientifically opioids were created for one reason only, and that was for the immediate trauma. And there was not a doctor back in 1999 or 2000 who would really prescribe opioids for 6, 7 years. It was mostly for the immediate trauma because that's what breaks that cycle, and then you can move on from them. But, because celebrities get to do, I was doctor shopping and had an opportunity to have 3, 4, 5 doctors writing me prescriptions anywhere I went. If I went to a hotel, I call up the hotel's doctor and say, yo, dude, I left my medication. Could you give me some more? And of course, I get 100 pills.
Right. So there was some addiction.
I don't want, back then, I would have not admitted to it, but yes, there was some addiction. But I also found out that I have an aversion to opioids. Opioids don't work in me the same way they work in other people. I could take 4 or 5 and maybe get a little relief. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that was doing nothing other than put me in a corner and help me drool. So it really didn't have the effect that it wanted. And so I had a doctor who literally, I will say this, a Harvard-trained doctor, who was my top neurologist at the time, who said, I know what you're doing. I've got a call from a couple of doctors who asked me, because you put my name down as being your primary physician, and I found out how many of these things you're getting a month. And if you're taking those, I'm not writing another script. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to tell any doctor who asks the question, don't write them for you. And he said, this is back in 2000. He said, 2001. He said, but I heard about this weird thing, this marijuana thing. There's some kind of marijuana. It's like CBDB-doo, doobie-doobie-doo. I don't know. So you're a smart guy. You research it, figure it out yourself. And I will never tell anybody I told you this, but I bet you might find some relief because I've had some other people say that they've gotten some relief. I did the deep dive, started really looking into cannabis back 2001, 2002, and then I started to realize some things that I think most people in this country don't recognize. One, throughout the entire 80s, the U.S. funded more research on marijuana than probably any other nation in the country. We funded a lot of research that was done by then Dr. Meshulam in Israel. 2, 1999, we applied for, and then 2002 gave ourselves a patent. The U.S. government gave ourselves a patent on cannabis. The patent number, if you want to look it up, 2230507. That patent was the first patent given for cannabis, and the United States government got it. They gave it to themselves, and for the last 4 or 5 years, we've been renewing that patent over and over and over again so that they can control CBD. And why? If you were to read the abstract, and folks, the abstract is the paragraph in the patent application that talks about the efficaciousness of whatever it is the issue is for a patent. Our government wrote in the patent how we knew back in 2000 that cannabis was a neuroprotectant, was help for ischemic issues like stroke. We knew back then because we had done the research 1980s, 1990s, funded the research. So we knew the efficaciousness of cannabis back then, but now we've continued to lie even up until today. I'm sorry, you put me in my soapbox.
But
we're lying up till right now. Still lying.
Listen, after COVID, I'm open to all discussions about government and lying and, CDC and the WHO and big pharma and who profits off all this stuff. I am all ears on all of it.
My brother, I mean, we in the last year alone, the FDA and Health and Human Services have written letters to the DEA and to the government talking about how arbitrarily grotesque it is the fact that we still have cannabis on a Schedule 1. Right. Cannabis is on a Schedule 1, which is on par with heroin and fentanyl, PCP, and drugs that we really don't know if they have any kind of viable medical use whatsoever. We know for a fact now, watch this, in the last 3 years alone, 2021, 35,000 peer-reviewed published articles about cannabis worldwide. There is more, 3,500, there are 35,000 total. There's more articles written on cannabis than any other drug you can get at a pharmacy. Anyone. There's more written on cannabis than it is on aspirin. And guess what? You're in an Airbnb, I'll bet you the only thing that they might have in a medicine cabinet around here is a bottle of aspirin.
Yeah.
And aspirin, if you leave it, if your kid comes home and takes half a bottle, you'll find them dead on the kitchen floor. But we don't talk trash about that.
Maybe there's an analogy here, which is I was in the air. I think the problem with cannabis is sort of the pot problem and I'll try to explain it. In that I was at LAX yesterday, and I was in line trying to check my bags, and I saw a middle-aged guy with 2 miniature dogs with him in a long leash, and I was like, those aren't service dogs. Those, you just want to travel with your stupid dogs, and that's bullshit. And he's got a note from his doctor saying he has anxiety or something. I was like, that is bullshit. Everyone here knows it's bullshit. But then 20 minutes later, I was walking through the airport, and there was a legitimately blind woman who had her arm hooked around another woman and had a dog with a handle on it. And I was like, that's a service dog, you know?
Right.
And so the problem is with pot and cannabis, sometimes we go, okay, this guy's legitimately using it because he has serious issues and medical issues and so on and so forth. And then there's like, oh, she just wants to get high. Gotcha. And she got a note from her doctor so she could get high, you know? And I think that hurts the movement a little sometimes. By the way,
but what else?
I shouldn't care.
Right.
I don't care if you just want to hang around and get high. Sure. It's better to me. I'd rather run into you high than run into you drunk. You're probably less likely to take a swing at me.
How about if you really want to think about this? It's so ridiculous that in the last 100 years, we have now found and vilified something that's been around for over 5,000 years.
Yeah.
And let's really think about it and talk about it, because what most people don't understand is that America was built on hemp.
That's
and
right.
Let's also understand the truth. Hemp and cannabis are the same plant. It's just because somebody came up with some arbitrary number and said if it's under 0.03% THC, we'll call it hemp. And if it's over 0.003%, we'll call it marijuana. Stop the stupid. It's the same plant. Every one of our forefathers grew that plant. Every one of them. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, they all grew it. This nation would not be the nation it is without hemp. Why? The entire Revolutionary Army was clothed in hemp. Let's go back to the late 1600s, early 1700s. You could pay your taxes in hemp in the United States. Our government forced farmers to grow hemp. Why? Every sail, every rope, every canvas on top of a canvas wagon that took us out west, all made from hemp. Again, I just told you, the only thing the North and the South had in common during the Civil War, was that their uniforms were made out of hemp. Sheets, bedding, ropes. We ate a hemp-based porridge in the 1700s and the 1800s. Everybody did. Why? Because hemp was identified as one of the highest protein-laden seeds on the planet. And if you ate hemp seeds doesn't have cannabinoids in it yet.
Yeah.
Has to grow to get the cannabinoids.
Well, so hemp, marijuana, they really had to fight 2 battles. At the beginning, they had to fight Hearst and big publications and people that...
Charles DuPont and Hearst, you're right.
Right. So they had to fight the sort of mechanical part, hemp, the fiber.
Yes.
And then later on, they had to fight pharmaceutical companies because of the bud that was on the hemp stock.
Correct.
Right? So they've had to fight a sort of mechanical fight and a sort of emotional, scientific fight.
But they didn't fight that fight. Most people don't know, again, there was a guy who really led the charge that got his funding from Hearst and Charles DuPont. The guy's name was Anslinger. Anslinger was the head of our prohibition for alcohol until that was repealed. Homeboy was out of a job.
Right.
And that's when he turned his sights on cannabis. And how did he do it? He turned his sights on cannabis saying, I read marijuana to everybody out there smoking. Well, let's back up for a second, folks. 1600s, 1700s, we didn't have toilet paper. You walked out into the woods, grabbed a leaf to wipe your booty, okay? You didn't have a bed. You were sleeping in the dirt. There was no air conditioning. There was no heat. So therefore, lives were pretty robust. And I'm trying to tell you, anybody who lies and says that, as you know, when you were deployed, if you were on a ship in the U.S. Navy, you got your ration of rope every week. Why did you get a ration of rope? Because the rope was made of cannabis. So that sailors, you're out at sea, you're barely eating, homie. You know what I mean? It rains hitting you every day. You're sleeping on the deck. Yeah, if you don't think people were walking around blazing a little joint back then, Our forefathers did so. Why? Because life was so robust that you needed something to take a little bit of that edge off. Remember, see, as a society, we forget the fact that in the United States, until early 1900s, everybody drank water that had 2.7 to 2.8% alcohol in it. Why? Because up the river from you, lions, tigers, and bears were going poop and pee in that water. So therefore, when you got your water into your village, you put it in a big cauldron and pot, and you boiled that crap, and you made a little alcohol in it, so it killed all the bacteria. We had babies walking around drinking water that was 2.5, 2.9, 3.2% alcohol. It's like near beer. Right. That's what you did. We did this. If you go back and look at any newspaper in America, go to your library. There are libraries out there, folks. People, you don't have to just do this in Google.
Well, that's where the homeless sleep.
That's right. Well, if you go out to your library and look at microfiche and look at newspapers from 1860, 70, 80, 90, there are probably, go back to the classifieds, you'll see the classifieds filled with ads about tinctures and other things made from marijuana, because that literally was what people were using as that over-the-counter medication.
So here's a question. We were able to pull it off back then because, the saying was, I don't know, I'll paraphrase, but, you want to go to battle with Hearst and he just goes, I got barrels of ink and you got nothing. So I'm going to win this battle. And we were able to win a lot of battles with reefer madness and whatever. I mean, look, the New York Times was basically denying the Holocaust in the 40s and winning Pulitzers and stuff for it. Right. And they could pull it off because what were our choices? Right. You got a New York Times. You lived in New York. You got a New York Times newspaper. That's it. There was no internet. There was no alternative voices. There was no Substack. There's no whatever. But they were able to pull it off again in different ways with things like COVID and still are with many things, the pharmaceutical industry and things like that. Are you surprised that they're able to sort of pull it off in this modern era?
I am shocked.
Oh, good.
I'm shocked.
And are they going to be able to keep it up? Because I feel like we got a little peek under their skirt a few years ago.
I'm going to tell you something. I'm shocked that right now, as a nation and as a populace, we allow this stupidity to happen. I really am, to tell you the honest truth. But it's going to take, I'm sorry, a lot of the dinosaurs that are supposedly in those offices down in Washington, D.C., we got to have some of these guys die off. They got to get out. Go. Yeah. Goodbye. See you later. We're done. You did your thing. Stop this stupidity. And also, Adam, a lot of people don't want to talk about it, but the whole basis behind Reefer Madness was a racist movement to ensure the ability to put those people in prison for something that they weren't putting those people in prison for. And we've continued to do so till today. We take a look back from the time 1937 when the Marijuana Tax Act made cannabis illegal. And folks, that's what it was made illegal for, the Marijuana Tax Act, not the Marijuana Deadly Drug Act, the Marijuana Tax Act. And why the Tax Act? Because we know that you can't track seeds across state lines. You can't. So they vilified and made it illegal. And back in 1937, 1941, then Mayor LaGuardia of New York put together a panel of doctors who literally back in 41 said that making cannabis illegal was one of the most egregiously offensive laws that the United States government ever passed. We passed that then because we recognized that its viability as an alternative medicine source. So now we allow the pharmaceutical industry to go ahead and vilify this and vilify this and vilify this. And now all of a sudden, the pharmaceutical industry is trying to get behind it. The same people who said that they never thought it worked are now trying to figure out how quickly they can synthesize something to make you buy it thinking that you're buying real cannabis. You take a look at the drug that they have in the marketplace right now, that Epidiolex, $1,400 for a weed. Right. Excuse me. I can fly over, which they've done, all along the Appalachian Trail and other places in this country. People have flown over and just dumped seeds out. That's why if you go messing around in the Appalachian Trail in certain places, you might find out that you opened up a can of whoop, you know what? Because there are people who are looking at their plants growing out there on federal land so that they don't get busted. But, now that we have legal 38 states in the District of Columbia that have passed some sort of legal cannabis laws, I mean, the truth of the matter is big business is trying to get in.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I guess you can sort of follow the money, and you'll get a lot of answers when you follow the money. But the part that I found a little surprising, but sort of mostly disappointing, is I think we kind of live this with ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine. I would say to Dr. Drew all the time, "Does this stuff work or not?" He'd go, "Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but it's inert." He'd say, ivermectin is one of the few things. I think it was ivermectin. It could have been hydroxychloroquine. He'd say one of the few things a woman can take pregnant. There's not many medications.
Right.
It's that safe that it's basically like saying, do you think a children's aspirin would help with COVID? And then Dr. Drew would go, I don't know if it's going to cure it, but give it a try. If your doctor says, they launched an all-out attack against those. And I'd turn on CNN, and they'd have doctors and epidemiologists, and they'd all be calling it horse-paced and going nuts.
Right.
And Rolling Stone, for Christ's sake, is running articles showing fake pictures of people standing in front of a clinic saying, these are gunshot victims, but they can't get in because people OD'd on horse-paste. And now, for me, I get what the pharmaceutical companies are doing. This stuff is practically free.
Right.
And if it's effective, you're not going to make any money.
Right.
But Rolling Stone, you know what I mean? What are you guys doing? And then when did this all become sort of weaponized? And how did you get everyone on the same page? It's not just Rolling Stone, New York Times, LA Times, CNN, ABC. And when did you guys become mouthpieces for the pharmaceutical industry? Or the CDC or the WHO? Like, I didn't hear one mainstream outlet say, well, look, if you and your doctor think it's a good idea, then give it a try.
Right.
Try some zinc, get some sunshine, a little exercise, and if the ivermectin works, it works. If it doesn't, it's not going to hurt you.
Right.
I didn't hear one thing out of anybody in mainstream, and if anyone started talking about it, they tried to get them deplatformed. And then that side, the free speech side, was like cheering them on for deplatforming people that said something about it. And I thought, I get what Upjohn and Pfizer are doing. I don't get what Rolling Stone is doing.
I don't understand why now, after, again, what I told you, there's been well over 35,000 peer-reviewed studied documents published on cannabis worldwide. There's studies going on all over the world. And, part of the reason why we still have cannabis illegal here is because of a 1963 treaty, a UN treaty that stopped for the importation and exportation of cannabis around the world that now almost 200 countries have pulled out of. So cannabis is growing around the world. People are starting to recognize that, hey, you know what? I don't have to take this $3,000 pill. If you go to Israel, cannabis is a geriatric drug, helping to get most patients, I think it's 65 or 70, you turn 65 or 70, you can go through one of 4 hospitals and they will give you an eighth for free to start you down your path because they recognize that there are certain things that cannabis can do that pharmaceuticals claim to do, that cannabis does achieve. So therefore, it's easier. We don't have to import all these other drugs. Also, when I was visiting Israel, I visited one particular grow facility there that just blew my mind. I pulled up in this spot. I'm telling you, it's crazy. It would never have passed here in the United States. We would never allow this. They've got this 3-acre plot of land. They're growing plants that are probably 5-6 feet tall, 6-7 feet tall. And there's the dust blowing through the regular desert dust. So there's dust on these plants. So it's not like it's in some secure FDA-approved facility. And, I watched the guys, and they had just harvested 1/2 of an acre. So I go back to the back of the building where they're actually prepping it, and there's a guy standing there, and he's got this literally industrial-strength wood chipper. And he's just taking the whole plant. He's not just stripping, the buds off. He's throwing leaves. He's throwing everything in there. I was like, Dude,
So he's throwing the buds in there too?
He's throwing the buds in this wood chipper. He's throwing some
stalk,
leaves,
the whole thing?
all the stalks, and then not the full stalk, but pulling off the little branches. Right?
Sprigs.
He's throwing the sprigs. It's all going. No sticks, no stems. Yeah, there's sticks and stems. Okay, it's going through this thing, and they're grinding it up, and they're blowing it into these big cellophane bags. And parked right beside the wood chipper is this 18-wheeler. And they are stacking these sealed bags in this 18-wheeler. And I'm going, dude, you only got like 30,000 people in the entire country on the registry. So where's this going? And the grower looked at me and said, Montel, the tot works in many ways. So what are you talking about? And then he kind of alluded to the fact that that wasn't just only for Israeli consumption. It was going to regions around that area. And then I went, so what's the thought? He says, well, most people, if they share a bud, they're more apt to just sit down and chill. And I'm thinking to myself, where was this going? So was it going across the border into places like Jordan and Egypt and other places? Yeah, it was. Because, I think in that area of the world, if more people chillaxed a little bit, then maybe we wouldn't have all the crap that's going on over there. I'm just saying.
I think that's a pretty accurate statement. So for you, how do you consume, if that's the right word?
Sure.
What is your regimen with THC?
Well, I shifted over years ago. CBD also.
Yeah.
I shifted over years ago. I'm a little less of a flower consumer than I am an extract consumer. And what I mean by that is that I do vape, where I use oils, and I do use edibles. I have probably gone the last, and I'm not kidding you, last 24 years straight, maybe missing consuming some sort of cannabis product for maybe only one day.
In 24 years?
In 24 years. I use CBD and I use CBDA pretty much every single day. I use a THC product. My consumption in the last couple of years has come down, but I use a THC product every single day. And I do that mostly before I go to bed. Because I suffer from, again, intractable pain in my feet, but I also have night tremors in my legs. And cannabis, from day one, stopped the night tremors almost immediately. I stopped kicking my wife, stopped kicking her in the shins.
Well, maybe she stopped being a bitch.
No, she never was. But I mean, honestly, I mean, we would I'd be in bed, and I literally at night I wouldn't even want to call it. It's almost as if it's called clonus, but I could have a tremor or a cramp in my lower legs that it just will wake me from my sleep, and it'll make me sit up on the edge of the bed. Started using cannabis, gone. Doesn't work, doesn't do it anymore at all. So I will try to either do a gummy or, say about an hour and a half or 2 hours before I'm ready to go to sleep. I have done a lot of studying with cannabis and recognize that there are other cannabinoids. Like right now, we haven't really done the research that needs to be done. There are probably somewhere around 260 active component parts to that plant in the cannabinoid world. Some people will say, no, Montel, there's only 100. No, I think you're crazy. I know they're well over 100. If you go to Canada, they'll tell you about 240. And what are cannabinoids? Cannabinoids are things that actually are naturally occurring substances in all mammals. People don't understand that as a mammal, we were born with something that's called our endocannabinoid system, which, for lack of a better term, is like a secondary sympathetic nervous system. We have receptors in our body that actually are antagonized or agonized by a plant-based cannabinoids. So you created, if you had never smoked a joint in your life, never consumed any cannabis in your life, I could test your blood and find something in your blood that's called either anandamide or 2-AG, which are these two cannabinoids that you make, your body produces. They are the only substances in your body that run retroactively or retrograde through your nervous system. instead of starting in the brain and coming down to the other part of the nervous system, when you if you walk through this Airbnb, and let's say you stub your toe against that counter right there, immediately your body sends a signal up to your brain. I hurt myself. Your brain sends a signal back.
I like to think I'd be a little more stoic, but
so
okay.
You might just go, oh, I hurt myself.
Yeah.
Well, the brain will send the signal back down to your toes, and it'll activate, what activates your white blood cells to send things there to stop the inflammation. Well, then there's this other thing that sends a signal back to your brain saying, I got enough. Because if you keep sending this, then you're going to start damaging the good material, the good part. Mm-hmm. That's where those endocannabinoids come in. We need cannabis. When we were probably little monkeys out on the savannah, we ran around the same way some animals do in the wild, seeking that cannabis plant to stop it, to help our immune system literally understand, okay, I've sent enough of this chemical down here, I don't need to send any more. The fact that we have not been using cannabis now for about 100 years as a society, and I'm telling you, if you go back into, again, 1800s, especially post the Civil War, we had so many people wandering around on this planet who were injured, in this country who were injured. They were looking for things that could help ease inflammation, and others, they sought out the cannabis plant. And so right now, it's finally time where I think, number one, research needs to be done because we understand that there are component parts like CBD, CBC, CBN, CBG, all these things that do things inside of our body to help us deal with injury.
All right, we'll take one last break. We'll be back with Montel Williams right after this. Well, let me tell you about Morgan & Morgan. It's 2024, so let's talk about something important. If you get hurt this year, your injury could be worth millions. If you're ever injured, you should check out Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm. Over 100 offices nationwide and more than 1,000 lawyers. Wow, they've done more than $20 billion they've recovered for over 500,000 clients. So let's say that's a pretty good track record. Morgan & Morgan is, they have a proven track record. That's what I just said. So they can fight to get you the full and fair amount of compensation. They've been fighting for the people for over 35 years. Racing my vintage cars, well, that can be hard, but submitting an injury claim with Morgan & Morgan, well, that's easy. So if you got an issue, had an injury, talk to my friends over at Morgan & Morgan. Am I right, Dawson?
If you're ever injured, you can check out Morgan & Morgan. Their fee is free unless they win. For more information, go to forthepeople.com/Adam or dial #law, pound 529 from your cell phone. That's forthepeople.com/Adam or #law, pound 529 from your cell. This is a paid advertisement.
Oh, Riley Auto Parts. Well, they're in the business of keeping your car on the road. Friendly, helpful service, and the parts people with the knowledge who know how to do maintenance and repair. It's so funny. I was just driving up in my old neighborhood the other day on Foothill Boulevard, and I saw the old O'Reilly I always used to go to when I lived in the neighborhood, and I was wrenching on my own car because I had to, because I couldn't afford a lease. I had to fix my own car. So they've got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online. You never have to worry. If you're in a jam, they got your part. The team at O'Reilly Auto Parts can test your battery for free in or out of your car, which is very helpful. And if it needs to be replaced, they'll help you find the right one for your vehicle. Need your windshield wipers replaced, a brake light fixed, or a quick service? They'll help you find the right part, or they'll point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. Whether you're an auto aficionado or a novice, O'Reilly employees are knowledgeable, helpful, and friendly. They're the professional parts people. So stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit O'ReillyAuto.com/Adam. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/Adam. Well, back at the Airbnb with Montel Williams. Let's be blunt with Montel. That's podcast, also Free Thinking with Montel as well. And the show, Military Makeover with Montel. That's going to air on Lifetime as well. Instagram and Twitter at Montel_Williams. So we're talking about politicians and old politicians, but Kamala Harris is a not too old politician who used to date back in the day.
You know, I like to say that I am a gentleman, and you know, I don't kiss and tell. You know, it was a while back. We had a relationship, and it ended, and we both moved on.
Was it for a period of time?
It was for a period of time.
And I'm not really the kiss and tell part doesn't interest me very much, but I do like sort of insights, like because I can't get a good read on her. I can't figure out if she's smart or she's vapid or it's an agenda. Because I can't figure out where she's coming from.
You'd have to understand. I mean, when you say is she smart, you know, no question. I mean, the woman ascended from being a public defender to the district attorney of San Francisco, then on to be the attorney general of the state of California, on to becoming the vice president of the United States.
No, I do think she's smart. But I think a lot of these people are smart, but they don't sound, what they're saying isn't making sense, is what I'm saying. So I don't know if it's all politics or how it works.
First off, it's really, I'll tell you a very funny story. I spoke, and when I graduated from high school, if you go back and look at my high school yearbook, it said I would be the president of the United States by 1994.
Oh, really?
And there was a period of time in my life where politics was something that interested me, and it could be why, because I used to say over and over again, if you're going to open your mouth and complain, then you need to step your mouth up and fix it and help fix it. And how do you help fix it in America? How did you help fix it in America? You used to fix it by becoming an interested, not necessarily a politician, but a person who would serve his community, whether it be at the local level or the national level. And you stepped up to the plate and used whatever experience you have to help make decisions that would help us all. These days, and if there's an aspersion against politicians, I really don't give a damn, because I'll make one. I think that there's not a person that's running for office these days that isn't running for their own personal greedy reasons to see if they can get ahead. It's every politician that's out there. I'm going to say that way because, if you go back to, let's go back to 1974, when I graduated from high school and went to the Marine Corps. I think if you look at our Congress and Senate, I think clearly close to 60 to 70% of them had served in our military.
Yeah.
Now look at them today, they don't. If you go back then, 60 to 70% of our politicians didn't make over $100,000 a year. Take a look at it today. 90% of them are millionaire plus.
Yeah.
So,
what's
going on?
Yeah, well, I would like a little military background, but I would also like some private sector background too, like live out in the world, start your own business, deal with regulation, deal with taxes, deal with burdensome regulations and all these entities that you're fighting so you can start a business, employ people, pay taxes. And especially where I'm from in California, it's like you're fighting the government to start a business, employ people, and then pay taxes.
Right.
And you've bizarrely sort of become the enemy. Mm-hmm. So I would like them to have a military background and or some private sector, been there, done that.
Private sector that's in service, in some sort of service, yes. I'm with you.
Yes, and so when you're going in to make legislation, you have that in your hip pocket of how does this affect a small business owner?
I agree.
And we're getting away from that, obviously, and also there seems to be an intellectual chasm that I wasn't aware of in past politicians. I'm hearing people say dumb stuff.
Let me tell you, I agree with you 100%. I don't understand what's going on. I don't understand why we as a populace accept this garbage from these people.
Well, is it though, and here's the thought I had when you were talking about, hey, don't complain about it. Go out and do something about it, which I think was true. It still is true, but it was true to a greater extent in the past. So one could say, well, Montel or Tucker Carlson or whomever, now instead of becoming a district selectman. You're just speaking into a microphone about things that matter to large groups of people, and maybe having more sway in your own way than somebody who makes legislation.
Right.
And so I don't think it's the choice now. It's like, well, become a politician or shut up. I think it's become a politician or don't shut up and start trying to tell people the truth about a lot of matters. And
I wish that was so true, but the First Amendment is going by the wayside. People don't want to hear what you have to say unless you say something that meets what or equals what they say. When I was asked a couple weeks ago, I spoke before the DEA, or I'm sorry, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and I did an hour-long presentation, and there was some questions and answers. And after I got done, one of the people that worked at this organization came to the microphone and said, "Mr. Williams, I mean, it sounds to me like you're the type of person that should be running for office right now." And I said, "I don't want to die." And I'm telling you, God's honest truth. I do not want to die. If there were a more independent person than me in this country, I'd say, show me. I only look at issues based on the individual issue, and I make my opinion on that issue. That may not carry on to the next issue. I may be conservative on some things, I may be liberal on other things, and I may be downright crazy on other things. But that's because I look at each individual thing, study it, assess it, come up with an opinion that is right for me. Unfortunately, you can't do that these days, because if you don't agree with one thing that I say, if somebody right there right now doesn't agree with the fact that I'm an advocate for cannabis, I am now the devil incarnate, and you will attack me until I shut my mouth. I don't feel like being attacked that way. I would love to be able to be a participant in our society, but our society doesn't want participants. They want people who will go along with what everybody else believes, and that's not what this society was built on. And unfortunately, I think we've seen our best days when it comes to that.
Do you think it's a generational thing? Like when you talk to 19-year-olds and you start talking to them about free speech, they say things like, well, free speech is good, but we can't have hurt speech out there. And we did a committee to decide who that is. Like, have we just lost it?
I feel so bad for you and your industry. I mean, being a comedian, because, I don't know. There used to be a day where, I'll take you down a walk down memory lane. Do you remember when, who was it? I can't remember. Andrew Dice Clay first hit the market. Andrew, I think, and I'm sorry, Andrew, don't get pissed off at me, brother, but I'm telling you, I think that you're part of the reason why we decided that free speech had to go away. Because he offended so many people. Now, some of what Andrew said was funny, but some of what Andrew said was really, I think, in some ways, he deliberately switched from being funny and talking about things in our society that you can laugh about. If I was a comedian today, I would walk up on the stage and start talking about people with MS. I got MS. I got a right to make a joke about myself. I can look in the mirror and think some things that I do are funny. But the MS community would attack me for making jokes like that, saying I'm trying to vilify people with MS. No, I'm not. I'm just trying to talk about something that's funny. If I was doing it in a way that was trying to be hurtful and harmful, now we're at that spot.
Well, okay, so Dice was one of the original sort of cancel culture victims in the sense that when he was guest hosting SNL, 1990 or whenever it was, he got boycotted by certain cast members. I think there was a couple of females in the cast who said, I'm not performing if this guy's guest hosting. So that's a pretty early iteration of an at least attempt at cancellation. I would argue that, when people go, look, I'm telling a joke, I'm trying to be funny, I'm talking about sensitive subjects, and then people go, it's not funny, whatever. Look, if it's not funny and it's just hurtful, then you'll lose your audience fast. Because it has to end up in some truth or some reality or some joke, even if it's wildly offensive, if it doesn't make sense. Like if you're just being mean for the sake of being mean, then you have no comedy act and you will lose your audience. So it's sort of a mathematical impossibility to go, this guy's a really funny comedian who just spews hatred. It's like, no, we're going to have some punchlines woven in there. Otherwise, people don't want to hear it, and they're not going to hear it. And by the way, the punchline is what makes the tough subject matter tolerable. So if you talk about a tough subject and then end it with a non-punchline, people won't tolerate it.
Right.
You have to end it with a laugh. The same way as if you're talking about a family member.
Right.
And you're making fun of them.
Right.
You just end it with, and he's a pedophile. The end. Then there is no, you don't get a second shot at Thanksgiving with that crew. You have to end it with something funny. And they do a lot of, well, that's not funny, or, who's the arbiter of funny. But I agree, we are living in a place where that kind of speech is under attack, and I think it's a generational thing, and I think it's going to create, my take on it is, I keep saying safe spaces and octagons. It's going to create, California's going to be a safe space, Florida's going to be an octagon. People who want to speak freely, who want rights, who want freedom, and so on and so forth. I don't think it's going to be any different than COVID. A lot of people lived in the safe space as California, Manhattan, places like that, Portland, Oregon, Seattle, and they went, oh, during COVID, I moved. I couldn't take it anymore. I went to Texas. I went to Florida. So there's going to be a self-selecting group where people will literally just congregate in places that sort of agree with them, and that they agree with legislation and also just a sort of je ne sais quoi, like the general order of things. Like they want more of this life. They don't want to yell. They want to walk through Santa Monica and get yelled at for not wearing a mask. They'd rather go to Texas and say hi to their neighbors.
Sure.
So I think we're already going there.
Right.
We're probably going to end up there. You already have Texas fighting the federal government about, building makeshift border walls and stuff like that. We're kind of spiraling toward that kind of society.
It's crazy.
And we're going to come to a point, I think, where Trump is in Florida and the federal government says, we need him. We're going to bring him to court in Manhattan, and Florida goes, no,
don't come up, don't step off the
we're
plane.
keeping him.
Yeah, he's going to stay here. Yeah.
Right. And I don't think that is that far off.
And what will that do for people in Virginia, people in Baltimore, people in Ohio? I don't know. I'm in my last quarter. It's like, I'm at the age where, I'm looking at the last quarter. I'm one of those kind of people who believes that I'm going to play this game until the last play of the game. People ask me all the time, are you going to retire? Hell no. Why should I retire? If I have something of value to do, I'm going to work until I drop.
Well, also, sorry to digress, but retire is like, don't take shop class, go to college.
Right,
no, we're trying to help people. They live longer. They're more fruitful. They live better lives when they don't retire.
Correct.
You're of retirement age, technically, but it would hurt you to retire.
It would. It would crush me. So I have no intentions of getting out of the game. However, I feel bad I just got a grandson this year. First year, I'm granddad.
Congrats.
So I have a 2-year-old he just turned 2, sorry. So second year. And I feel bad for him because this will not be the same place we see today by the time he hits his age 20. I have no idea what is in store for him. And I pray that, at some point in time, we at least start to remember and recognize how we all got here. Because it took all of us to get here. It's going to take all of us to get to the next place. And the more and more we decide to stop the bullshit, and start to figure out how we can look at the things that really do bring us together rather than what separates us, I think America has a chance. But if we continue to look at what divides, you know what I mean? In some ways, I'm going to say I'm happy this is my last quarter because I don't want to live through that next bullshit. Sorry, I said
no,
it.
it's morbid. It's a little depressing and morbid when you start thinking like, well, look, if we go to hell in the handbasket, I made it to the fourth quarter.
Right.
So,
I know it is morbid. I'm sorry, but it's like, dude, I'm gonna ride this out until the last one. My dad worked until he passed away. He was 92, getting ready to be 93. He worked until 91. He was a tax arbitrator for the state of Maryland. He went to work every day, and what got him up every day, I remember I was laughing. I said, dude, it's time to stop. He said, why? Why should I? I get to put on a suit, go into an office, and people show me respect every day, Montel.
Yeah.
And I was like, you're right about that, dude. You're 90 years old, and you're still getting the respect that you want. Go for it.
We kind of demonized work, and I realized a lot of people did it where they went, why should you have to work past 65? Why should he have to paint his own bedroom? Why should he have to mow his own lawn? Like, why? It's good for you.
Absolutely. Really good for you.
And everything you don't want to do is essentially good for you. Sadly, I mean, we understand it when it comes to food. Mm-hmm. Everyone wants an In-N-Out burger, but we understand the carrot sticks are better for us. So take that and apply it to everything in life, and you'll have your answer. I've always just said everything is diet and exercise. It's not, I'm not talking about weight loss. I'm just saying, as a metaphor, everything is diet and exercise. You don't want to do it. It's the best for you. And that'll apply to working. That'll apply to relationships. That'll apply to every facet of life. Just take the road that seems a little less comfortable, and you'll end up like Montel.
Yeah, well, you know what? Hopefully, but make sure that along the way, you recognize that being here and being part of what is society is reaching out and helping others. I mean, one of the things that I've been working on in the last couple of years that really, I got to tell you, more people need to know about. I've been working with a project that's called RTM, Reconsolidation of Traumatic Memories. And this project is a project that works with what is now considered one of the most efficacious treatments for PTSD in the world.
Let me guess. It's cannabis based.
No, as a matter of fact, it's not.
Damn.
It is just it's a psychological protocol. You ready for this? In 5 to 10 hours, no medication, it can completely remit all symptoms of PTSD in 5 to 10 hours. And it can be taught and done virtually. Right now, it's being utilized in Poland and the Ukraine for warfighters and for some of the civilians who are suffering from PTSD over there right this minute. But right now, we have been fighting. I'm telling you, for the last 5 years, this is what just pisses me off so much about this government and our bureaucracy, is we've been fighting here to make this available to our own veterans, and not just veterans, but our EMS workers, our first responders, some people who have been suffering from PTSD from COVID, civilians, because this thing works not only for combat PTSD, it works for all forms of PTSD, childhood sexual trauma, rape, spousal abuse. It works for all of that. But because it has not been part of this bureaucratic garbage that's gone on for years, there's the standard of care for PTSD in America today is something called sorry, my brain just slipped.
Okay.
It's a protocol that they've been utilizing that has never been proven to be more than 35 to 37% efficacious. That standard of care, because it was created by a group of people, they have fed this. It's called exposure therapy. They fed this to our veterans, and our veterans don't even like to use it. They don't even want to go to it. Some of them will participate for a couple of hours and then walk away and go ahead and go back to the years of pharmaceuticals rather than ending their PTSD. This, 90% efficacious. 9 out of every 10 patients who have been through it have been cured, and they've cured over 1,000 people.
What's it based on?
It is a phenomenal protocol that was created by a doctor by the name of Dr. Burke, who worked with survivors of 9/11. It is a protocol that, if I can do it in layman's terms, they basically, first off, most people don't understand that PTSD is something that is not only psychological, but is a physical manifestation. It literally gets etched in the amygdala of your brain because, like fight or fright, Back when we were cave people, if you and I were sitting here right now and we were getting ready to walk outside the cave, and I walk out and this big thing called a saber-toothed tiger jumped on your back, just saying, jumped on your back and started biting the hell out of you. I ran back inside the cave, put a couple bushes up, and I made sure, from this point on, in my brain, there's a hard wire that says, when I see that thing way over there on that mountain with them 2 long teeth, get your ass back inside because he's going to come and eat you.
Right.
All right. So what RTM does is it helps to break that physical manifestation. It helps to break that physical thing by allowing you to, and again in layman's terms, what they do is they take the patient through a series of sessions where they basically make you who are suffering from PTSD act as if you are let's say the camera operator in the back of a movie theater. You are the projectionist. You project your trauma up on a screen, and while you're projecting it on a screen, you also see a whole bunch of other people in the movie theater looking at it, and they realize that you run that trauma first through in black and white, then you run it through in color, then you run it backwards, then you run it backwards again, and you start to realize every time that you look at it, guess what? The people in the audience aren't overreacting to it, and maybe I don't need to. And so by the time that they've run it and looked at it, they're not reliving it, they're projecting it for others to see. It makes their amygdala say, okay, I don't have to be afraid of this. And most people after 10 hours remit all of the things like hypersensitivity, the lack of sleep, all the things that people who suffer from PTSD have start to fade away. And we have now proven this. This has been studied, Walter Reed 2 times, King's College 2 times, published 3 times. The world knows that this works, yet we have these entrenched bureaucrats who are still trying to suck money out of those who suffer, who are going to fight this until the last tooth and nail and not allow this to happen. So there is information up there right now. You can go up yourself, find it. RTM, Reconsolidation of Traumatic Memories. It's run by an organization, PTTI, that literally are actually starting to gain traction now across the country. I've got this in front of the Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of the Toro, been talking to Rick Perry about it, and Rick Perry is now becoming a part of it. We have clinicians around the country who have looked at it and recognized that it works, and they're starting to use it.
Well, this is to my point, which is you better serving these victims as a civilian versus as a politician.
Yes, sir.
And you have more reach, more scope, more scale versus being a local something, in which case we wouldn't know your name. It'd be hard to get a meeting with people you wanted to meet with, and so on and so forth. And maybe sadly that's the light at the end of the tunnel. People like you, it's sort of like they do this thing where some kid has a disease and all the doctors say nothing will ever work, and the mom, who's a housewife, but she's motivated highly because that's her kid, goes to work and does the research and discovers a thing, and the next thing you know there's a breakthrough. And I just wonder if the motivated Marines, pardon the pun, like yourself, are going to be the ones that create the change and make the difference. And maybe that's where we're heading.
I got to tell you, I think there's a lot of, first off, PTSD is something that's suffered by probably anywhere between 7 and 15% of our veterans. It's going to be them who are going to say, and they've already said, enough is enough when it comes to exposure therapy and some of the other treatments. They're looking for something that will help relieve all their symptoms and cure them. But the problem becomes, this is how asinine this is. We have a soldier who spent 3-4 tours in the Middle East. Comes back, he's missing an arm, he's missing half his leg. He's suffering from PTSD because rockets red glare were near him within 50 feet. The bombs were dropping. He got blown up in a Hummer. That young man right now is getting disability for his PTSD, not only the loss of limbs, but his PTSD. Our government is so asinine that we're willing to spend $50,000, $60,000 to $130,000 per head a year to treat the PTSD, rather than cure it and say, now that you're cured, because you suffered the way you did, we owe you. So instead of taking away his $50,000 a year that he was getting in disability, which our government does right now, if he were to say, hey, I feel really good, I feel great, he'll lose some of his disability, and now we got a homeless veteran. Why not say, you know what, for what the debt that you paid for us, we still owe this to you. Let's give him $40,000. Let's give him $42,000 a year for the rest of his life. Why not? Because it stopped your child from having to go over there and lose a limb.
Yeah, the other thing too is PTSD. You brought up the scope and scale goes well beyond the military.
Yes.
You go to rape victims and molestation, incest, physical abuse, all this stuff. And let me tell you, that's the gift that keeps giving.
Absolutely.
When you get physically abused when you're 9, sexually abused, whatever it is, then you perpetrate that on other people. You become use violence as a coping mechanism and so on and so forth. And you just create a new generation of abusers because you've not dealt with your trauma. And now, I used to do it on Loveline. It's like most every guy that's a pedophile, he was a victim at some point. We don't want to think of him that way because we don't want to think of him as a 9-year-old being a victim. So we don't want to have any sympathy for that guy. But these guys were almost always victims at some point. Now they're acting out. There's a violent, it's a domestic violence version of that. There's a version of this that would help society a lot if these people got some help.
And not only that, but we're looking. We just came out of. We talked about it a couple of times. We come out of COVID. Do you know that somewhere around 11 to 15%, depending on which study you look at, people who spent more than 2 days in the hospital for COVID are suffering from PTSD today. Why? Because they were laying in a bed with people in spacesuits coming around them, chucking them out, and touching them and probing them and sticking them and stuffing hoses down their throats and pulling them out. People dying next to them. People. So we have a society, and if we just say COVID, 11 to 15%. How about the 9/11? My son-in-law is a firefighter in New York City, an EMT. He had to go to house after house after house to see a dead body, recover that dead body, because if somebody called 911, my mother's not breathing, they shows up, the lady's dead.
Right.
And this kid had to live through this. This is my son-in-law, the father of my grandchild. And he's got so many of his peers that are suffering today. And he's not suffering. I'm not going to say that he is. He tries to hold it in, but who knows? 5 years from now, it may all creep up on him. So, we know now that the cure exists. And I'm using the cure. 9 out of 10 is not really a cure. 9 out of 10 is an efficacious treatment. It exists. The government needs to stop fighting it and allow access to this to all our veterans and all those who are suffering today.
A good note to go out on. Montel, let me give you a plug. Let's be blunt with Montel. Free Thinking. It's the pod as well. Military Makeover with Montel, which airs on Lifetime. I'm glad we're able to work this out, Montel.
I am too, sir. Thank you so much for having me.